Okay, this is American Contractor. Today's date is December 25th, 2015. This is a document from the Ministry of Planning from the Republic of Iraq. What I want to do is I want to read off some things to you. And let's go to page 56 of this document. Talk about the financial and monetary sector. Monetary sector and the monetary policy. The Iraqi Central Bank's monetary policy has not been effective over the past 3 decades. This policy was set under the auspices of Law No. 64 of 1976. However, it failed to manage foreign reserves, achieve economic stability, or defend a stable exchange rate for the Iraqi Dinar. Managing the country's foreign currency resources, mainly oil revenues, was done using a mechanism that necessitated recording the revenues in the foreign reserve account at the Iraqi Central Bank, provided its equivalent in Iraqi dinars would be recorded in the Ministry of Finance's account at the central bank. That mechanism happened automatically for both the foreign and currency and its Iraqi dinar equivalent, and continued to constitute a single unit with respect to public budget revenue elements. Managing the components of the foreign currency reserve and their roles in supporting monetary policy needs, namely to achieve stability, support growth, and balance out of inflationary pressures, was an issue generally seen as formality and totally unrelated to monetary policy. That is because the financial policy allowed use of these reserves and considered them highly flexible methods of paying and fulfilling the obligations of the previous regime. This was done by exchanging the Iraqi dinar for foreign currency. For the last 3 decades of the last century, this view caused monetary policy to follow the courses and trends of financial policy using the public budget. In other words, monetary policy with all of its tools supplanted national debt tools with foreign currency when the Iraqi dinar was exhausted. The excessive possession of foreign currency and its replacement with the Ministry of Finance's treasury transfers rendered the central bank incapable of addressing domestic liquidity pressures, including demand pressures on foreign currency to finance external commerce. The situation became worse whenever treasury transfers replaced foreign currency by printing new money to fund public budget deficits. This greatly increased domestic liquidity in the absence of a true reserve of foreign currency for over 2 decades. Consequently, the Iraqi dinar's external value of depreciated and exchange rates fell, causing severe shocks that created unprecedented inflation in prices and continued deterioration in living standards. Therefore, stabilizing domestic liquidity rates, addressing inflation, and defending a stable exchange rate became impossible tasks for the central bank and its management tools, even though such capabilities were desired and expected. For this reason, under the auspices of Law No. 64 of 1976, monetary policy became a hostage to the public budget policy in the process of random spending. This rendered the Iraqi Central Bank's budget nothing more than a reflection of myriad unplanned, uncoordinated activities undertaken in the public budget. Furthermore, financial objectives dominated monetary objectives as the objectives of monetary stability were disregarded. Indeed, the value of the Iraqi dinar and the degree of its stability were linked to policies for financing the growing government deficit. In addition, continual direct and indirect borrowing from the Iraqi Central Bank became a major source of inflation in Iraq in the years that preceded issuance of the new Iraqi Central Bank Law No. 56 of 2004. Now, you guys remember that Iraqi Central Bank Law No. 56 of 2004 is the CPA law. Now let's continue on here. After 2003's Iraq Monetary Authority undertook an important set of procedures and steps in the monetary field. They were aimed at promoting economic and financial stability, developing them and maintaining the stability of the domestic prices, to create a competitive economic environment based on supply and demand, and to establish independent objectives and trends and set policies accordingly. Among the important procedures adopted were to replace the domestic currency on January the 15th, 2004 at a value of 4 trillion of the old Iraqi dinars, license foreign banks, hold a daily auction for foreign currencies, and issue new legislation for banks and the Iraqi Central Bank, namely Law No. 56 of 2004. This law aimed to reformulate the objectives, methods, and tasks of the central bank to reflect a market economy, a bank governed by a clear monetary, banking, and financial environment. The new law expanded the authorities of the central bank, granted it independence, and adopted the primary objective of working to maintain the stability of domestic prices. The law also aimed to change monetary policy tools in favor of quantitative indirect tools as used in advanced countries. Using these new tools would expand the bank's influence over the banking system, particularly with respect to open market processes, which had not been practiced by the bank since its establishment and until 2003. Moreover, under the new law, there were changes made to the bank's compulsory legal reserves. The central bank required banks to maintain reserves in the form of cash holdings or deposits at the central bank. No bank was allowed overdrafts from these reserve accounts. Furthermore, the reserve amount was set at 25%, provided 20% of the bank's deposits were deposited at the central bank and 5% was held in cash in safety deposit boxes at the bank. Accepting deposits for nightly investment from banks with surplus balances was one of the new trends in the monetary policy. Moreover, the bank adopted an index interest rate called the bank rate, and banks had complete freedom to set interest rates and deal with each other in the market pursuant to any agreed upon rate. The central bank enhanced its role as a supporter of banks by providing credit facilities as the lender of last resort. These credit facilities took the form of 3-month loans to banks facing crisis. The loan could be renewed by the central bank, provided the banks participated in stabilizing the financial system. The interest rate applicable to these LLR loans, these last resort loans, whereas the index interest rate plus 3.5%, for example, an interest rate of 10.5%. The new law demonstrated the central bank's independence by giving it the right to refuse to give credit or direct or indirect loans to the government or public entity. The only limited exception was what the central bank might not do to provide and support liquidity for the benefits of the state-owned commercial banks under central bank supervision. Such support would be in the form of loans that would have the same provisions and conditions applicable to commercial banks of the private sector. Furthermore, the central bank had the right to purchase government bonds provided the purchase was done on the secondary market and in accordance with market mechanisms. In summary, the central bank's approach to deal with the government consisted of the fact that the ability to print money was independently of the ability to spend money in the public budget. Thus, the monetary policy of the Iraqi Central Bank enabled the country to stabilize its monetary system and address inflationary activities in waves following great improvement in the exchange rate of the Iraqi Dinar, which has risen by more than 40% in the last 5 years. Furthermore, it has built strong foreign currency reserves that are over 44% of the actual GDP. The interest rate has played a positive role in strengthening confidence in the Iraqi dinar. In turn, basic annual inflation rates, which exceeded 34% 3 years ago, have now decreased to 7% per year. This was achieved after a period during which monetary policy had been undermined by widespread use of the dollar, speculation, the development of liquidity alternatives derived from material assets, including commodities and the dollar. These alternatives have functioned like money, as they were a store of value and a monetary liquidity tool beyond the scope of the existing system. These phenomena had led the system to its weakest point in the country's economic history. The Iraqi dinar's attractiveness today, as a strong national currency, has become the best tool for promoting monetary savings and financial mediation. It is also the proper and suitable path for addressing inflation expectations, which have made dinar substitutes favorite methods of wealth accumulation. The latter have become a form of revenue similar to interest, though superior to the nominal interest offered by banks, and have generated powerful intangible returns caused by inflation. This inflation trend has become an element of speculation in the economy because it indicates the avoidance of real investments by transacting with material or real assets. They are considered highly liquid assets and can achieve a quick profit, as they can have a high return driven by inflation expectations. Because they are not bank interest rates, they render the market careless about productive activity. That is why the index interest rates adopted by monetary policy were a countermeasure to inflation and the expectations associated therewith. This was done to allow true investment to regain its proper role beyond the scope of the inflationary speculation. Despite all the complicated transitional political circumstances, monetary policy was able to promote the nation's monetary structure and achieve tangible levels of economic stability. It was also be able to defend strong, stable exchange rates and attractive national currency. Now let's talk about the money supply here. In its narrow sense, money supply means the total supply of money in circulation plus current deposits. The money supply noticeably increased in the 1970s, going from 217.7 million dinars in 1970 to 1,575.8 million dinars in 1979. This absolute increase is attributed to the nationalization of oil and the increase in oil prices in 1973. The absolute increase in money supply was larger than the actual monetary increase in the GDP. However, in the late 1970s, there was excess demand for cash because the real output was high, with absolute levels that exceeded the absolute levels of the increase in the money supply. This led to a reduce in price levels and production costs, as well as increase in the real value of the Iraqi dinar. This reflected the degree of responsiveness to the general price level, whether up or down, in the face of changes in the money supply and the GDP. In the 1980s, money supply increased from 2,650.2 million dinars in 1980 to 11,868.2 million dinars in 1989. This increase is attributed to the increase of credit offered by the banking system to finance the increasing governmental deficit that resulted from the increase in the public military spending requirement. The percentage of currency in circulation averaged 85% of the total money supply during the period from 1980 to 1990, with the remaining 15% held in current deposits. This explains why the monetary stability coefficient increased during that period and was greater than 1. Indeed, it reached 4.1% in 1989. This means that the average growth rate for the money supply was higher than the average growth rate for the GDP. In other words, there was a monetary surplus and an increase in prices. In the 1980s, money supply grew at an average growth rate of 74%, whereas it was 23.7% during the decade of the 1990s because the only factor affecting money supply in the 1990s was printing money. For example, governmental borrowing from the Monetary Authority. The money supply increased from 15,359.3 million dinars in 1990 to 1,728 billion dinars in 2000 and 3,013 billion dinars in 2002. This increase explained by the widening gap in the money supply totaling 775.5% during the period and economic sanctions and compared to the 153.8% during the 1980s. This explains the continual increase in the monetary stability coefficient, which was greater than 1 throughout the 1990s and exceeded 4.5%. The percentage of money in the circulation was 87.3% in 1990 and decreased to 85.3% in 2000, whereas the current deposits were no more than 12.7% in 1990 and increased to 14.7% in 2000. So you can look right here at this chart, table 17, how the money supply increased from 2003, say 2007, it increased a whole lot. Now the financial monetary sector. Per the money supply indicator after 2003, Iraq continued to apply its expansion policy. The money supply reached at its highest levels in terms of absolute value, table 17, when it increased from 5.7 trillion dinars in 2003 to 28.7 trillion in 2008. This great increase is attributed to continual and effective increases in governmental spending within the operating and investment arenas. The growth in money supply can be tracked and compared to the change in the GDP, showing that the money supply grew at a rate of 38% during that period, as compared to a GDP growth rate of 21.1% at current prices and 5.6% at fixed prices. With respect to the components of money supply, the currency in circulation was quite high in 2003 at 80.2%. However, that percentage declined to 65.5% of total money supply in 2007 as a result of the positive effect of the interest rate that led to an increase in the percentage of current deposits from 19.8% in 2003 to 34.5% in 2007. Despite this increase, the growth of cash demonstrates that the applicable expansion policy caused inflation pressures. Through the tools of its monetary policy, the monetary authority sought to apply procedures to limit inflation. Now I was going to talk about this inflation. Inflation is not a new phenomenon in the Iraqi economy. It appeared in the 1970s after the nationalization of oil and the increase in oil prices, as well as the influence of the 5-year development plans. However, inflation was no higher than 5%. This rate increased in the 1980s and worsened following imposition of the economic sanctions in the 1990s, which led to stoppage of Iraqi oil exports, a freeze on Iraq's foreign currency accounts, and reliable on the printing of new currency as a sole source for financing public spending. Inflation rates increased as indicated in Table 18, which shows the average annual compound growth rate during the period from 1980 to 2003. Table 19 depicts the disparity in the inflation rate before 2003. It confirms that rates increased as a result of the monetary policy applicable at the time, particularly the policy of inexpensive cash and funding the state's budget deficit by printing cash. The rate reached 500% in the 1990s, despite the strict monetary procedures and policies of the central bank, as well as the policy of fixing the dinar's exchange rate against the dollar. The continuation of this policy later strengthened the Iraqi dinar against the dollar and kept it between 1,454 and 1,205 during the period of 2003 to 2008. The magnitude of financial support provided by the state for most ration card commodities also led to an increase in inflation rates. So here's the different inflation rates. 2003 it was 32%, and 2007 was 30%. It got as high as 53.2% in 2006. The average was 36%. The standard price was 32.6% in 2003 and increased to 53.2% in 2006, but it decreased to 30.8% in 2007. This indicates the success of the monetary policy after 2003 in reducing the severity of inflation. It gives a good indicator of the degree of efficiency of the procedures applied by the monetary authorities toward reducing inflation rates, which is considered the main objective of the Iraqi Central Bank. There are costs and burdens on the budget of the central bank associated with achieving this objective. An annual reduction of inflation by 20% added purchasing power, estimated at 21 trillion dinars to the economy. The cost of the monetary operations undertaken by the central bank is 2 trillion dinars. Each dinar of cost yields 10 dinars of benefit because of the monetary policy multiplier. This depends on the proper selection of the nominal index or index interest rate. Monetary policy has worked to achieve the objective of stability and address inflation by depending on the signal from the nominal exchange rate, which considers the price of money, and by depending on the signal from the exchange rate, it considers the external value of money. It talks about the interest rate. Since its establishment, the Iraqi Central Bank has relied on the policy of administratively setting the bank interest rate paid and received. During the previous stages, these prices did not exchange to suit inflation trends, so they tended to be negative real interest rates during periods when inflation was present in the Iraqi economy over the past 3 decades. This is evidenced by the increase in the relative magnitude of current deposits as compared to fixed deposits, and indeed, the decline in interest rates as compared to inflation rates made holding cash unprofitable. This had negative effect on the magnitude of saving deposits and oriented capital towards speculation. Therefore, before 2003, the interest rate had limited effect. After 2003, the monetary authorities sought to activate the role of interest rates to encounter inflation and the expectations resulting from it. On March 1, 2003, the interest rate was liberalized, and monetary policy adopted the interest rate as a reference and an operating objective for adopting a policy to counteract the expansion in government and current investment spending, as well as to contain and restrict the inflation rates associated with the spending. To achieve this objective, the central bank set the interest rate at 6% in 2004. It later increased to 16% in 2006. That was done to make the interest rate in the positive range for the borrower to stimulate savings at banks, to participate in reducing the burdens of public spending, to withdraw the cash surplus, and to control domestic liquidity. Now here's the different interest rates of the central bank. In 2004, it was 6%. In 2007, they jacked it up to 20%. All right. Now, as this trend continued, the interest rate grew to 20% in 2007. During 2008, the Monetary Authority applied continual and accelerated reductions to adapt to and decrease inflationary levels. The interest rate was subsequently reduced to 16%, 14%, and 7%. The reduction procedures were the result of the relative success in controlling inflation and stimulating bank credit, particularly in the private sector where investment covered the decline in government spending. That decline in the state's funding capabilities resulted from the international economic crisis. Now, exchange rate. Before 2003, the exchange rate was subject to the fixed rate of US 3.3 per Iraqi dinar. There were 13 exchange rates bearing different names in the parallel exchange market. As a result of the rapid increase in the price of the dollar relative to the dinar, driven by political events, instability, and the approaching change in the pre-2003 regime, the price of the dollar jumped to 1,957 dinars. The reasons include loss of confidence in the Iraqi currency and loss of its role as a store of value. Psychological factors and increased inflation expectation also contributed to the increase. In early 2003, the exchange rate deteriorated when military operations commenced against Iraq. The price of the dollar rose to 2,541 Iraqi dinars and then to 3,000 dinars. However, Central Bank Law No. 56 in 2004 was issued for the purpose of achieving balance between demand for the dollar and a supply and to find a balanced dollar-dinar exchange rate. In addition, the law sought to stabilize the exchange rate so it could affect the price stability and make the domestic currency more attractive. The law also sought to limit the phenomenon of transacting in dollars by providing proper exchange rate signals. All these factors contributed to an increase in the value of the Iraqi dinar, which then reached 1,218 dinars per dollar, an increase of more than 40% in the dinar's exchange rate as compared to 2003. In Table 21 shows the great improvement in the Iraqi dinar's exchange rate resulting from an improvement in oil exports, growth of trade surplus, modification of monetary policy to support the external value of the Iraqi dinar, use of interest rate tools to control domestic liquidity, and the use of public auctions for foreign currency to achieve balance in the foreign currency market. And here's the exchange rates. Changes in the Iraqi dinar's exchange rate for the years 2003 to 2008. 2003 was 1,936. By the time 2008 rolled around, it's 1,205. And I think today is 1,182 for December 2015. Let's go on here. Positive developments in the exchange rate index that were adopted by the monetary policy represent the most important and pivotal exchange leading to a reduction in total costs within the real economy, promotion of growth, and the increase of total revenues from productive activity. The future strategy of the monetary sector is to continue improving the dinar's exchange rate in a gradual, studied manner, using the indirect tools provided by the monetary policy to influence the factors affecting the exchange rate. These factors include reducing domestic inflation rates, supporting the advantages of foreign payments and reserves, organizing and regulating the foreign currency market, and working to develop other monetary tools, including creating a stock market and attracting foreign investments. All right, I think you guys get the picture of what I'm reading about. I hope you learned something here. And if you have any questions about this document or whatever, just put the question down in the YouTube channel, or you can email me. I'll put my email address at the end of this, and make sure you like the YouTube channel, subscribe to it, and leave some comments, share it, and thank you for listening.